Welcome, everyone. So, Trent, just so you know, when the countdown is playing, you don't need to unmute your mic. It will unmute itself the moment the countdown stops.
Now you tell me. Now you tell me.
I saw you unmuting your mic, and I was like, nope, that's not how we do this here. So I muted you again, and then you unmuted it. I'm like, oh, all right. Well, he's a boomer. We all understand the problems here. So welcome, everyone.
I was really excited about the countdown thing. It was really pretty.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a music I mixed with the Apostate Prophets music and then made a countdown. So
is that right?
That's right. So welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. We have got this really old guy with us who doesn't understand technology well.
Don't talk about Fan that way, man.
I won't. I'm sorry.
He can hear you.
I got the youngest looking face here.
Yeah, dude. There's a reason why you got it all covered with that dark hair.
Mm-hmm. It's okay. If I shaved my beard, I look like I had 5.
Speaking of which, when I was watching this Target video, all I could think about was, I just watched the Super Bowl this last Sunday, and I was waiting for your little mustache to like fly off.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna bring it back. I just I need a haircut before I can.
That wasn't a request.
So what are we doing here today, ladies and gentlemen? We got a response from an atheist named SkyDivePhil. We evaluated the debate he did. We said some things that were positive and negative. He acknowledged the positive, but then he really wanted to push back on the negative. And Than and I both watched his response and we're like, what are you doing? Like, this is so bad. So the title of the video is 10 Mistakes from Inspiring Philosophy's Biblical Defense. And just a quick note, if you're going to label a video that, you better make sure you get your facts right, because, oh, that'll be embarrassing if you, I don't know, confuse meta ethics and normative ethics. I mean, that would be super embarrassing. And
I actually watched it with my 15-year-old son, who's super bright. But he was, because I wanted to just like discuss it with him and say, hey, watch this, and I've never heard of that guy, Phil, whatever. I was hoping he'd be a little bit better than the average internet atheist. But I'm watching it with my 15-year-old son, and he's just like, because he knows enough philosophy and is just smart enough to, he knows a non sequitur. In fact, what he kept saying was, that's not what he said. That's not what he said. And then, and Phil's clips were like, he'd be like, and here is Michael Jones saying this, and the clip would be, and it would like literally be a fourth of a second. And like, I don't think that might not have been what he said.
Yeah, that happened a lot. So Trent came up because we had referenced Trent's book, and then Phil decided to comment on it. And I was like, it'd be really cool. Let's just get, well, Than had the idea, and then I approved it. But Than had this cool idea that we should just get Trent on. And I was like, at first I was like, oh, let me think. It may be too crowded. But then I was like, you know what? Now it probably wouldn't be. Let's bring Trent on to talk about his book and these issues, because I think he might have some interesting things to say.
It's not too crowded. The three of us fit on this screen quite nicely, I think.
Yeah,
that's true. We're all nice and skinny.
If people want to know more, maybe Trent and I will just record our hour-long conversations we have on the phone sometimes. And
that's right.
Post them.
We live stream that.
No one wants to hear you guys flirting. What are you talking about? It's ridiculous.
It's not flirting. It's not flirting.
Hey, the bromance is real, man. Don't diss it. The bromance is real.
Yeah.
We could all just go hit the gym together,
There we go.
Yeah, all
Bunch
of us
bros
live
doing-
on other parts of the country. That'll make
That's
sense.
right. We could hardly be more spread out. And earlier, Than's like, "Hey, I'll come up there," and I'm like, "You are approximately 1,000 miles north of me. Are you literally? You might even be closer to go around the globe and back up. So maybe you will go up to Dallas from wherever you are in Manitoba or whatever."
I'll make it work.
Yeah, speaking of upcoming events, just so you guys know, in 2 days I will be flying to Jersey for a debate in 2 days. It's the Lawrence Krauss. We're going to be debating which is better for humanity, Christianity, or secular ethics. And I am looking forward to that. So if you guys live in or around the New Jersey, New York area, come see me. And yeah, it's at DebateCon 5. Just Google it. You will find the address just fine. So, all right. With that, you guys ready to get into this video here?
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
All right. So make time markers. Again, we're just going to respond to, the main core of it all. And Phil did acknowledge that, yeah, we did say some positive things about him and Alex. So I appreciate that. But then he had a lot of criticism. So let's get into it. And then I will stop it and you guys can dig in. I'm going to save a lot of my ranting for the end when he tries to do sociology. So let's get into this.
I don't think this is a straw man because he says he's responding to Cliff's arguments or beliefs. Great. But I mean, like, we can easily say not all Christians believe in a global flood.
Yep.
Right then and there.
Mhm.
Not all Christians believe that these Old Testament passages, like he mentioned, like he alluded to, 1 Samuel 15 is literal. I've argued it's hagiographic hyperbole.
In the paper,
Now, real quick, or just to clarify what I'm saying there, I'm just talking about specific passages that he had brought up in the debate, where he was assuming, like, for example, 1 Samuel 15 is just utterly wiping out every man, woman, child, young and old, infant, young. And we were simply saying that's probably not the passage is going about. That was not our full argument against the problem of suffering.
Yeah.
That was a part of it. The way Phil took it, though, didn't really seem to be in context. So let's hear him out.
paper I wrote and cited during the debate, my colleagues and I specifically addressed this claim. You don't have to be a literalist. What you have to be is someone who thinks that God's actions as depicted in the story, like killing the animals in the 10 plagues, is good. It's independent of whether they happened or not. Think of an analogy. We could assume that George Lucas, author of Star Wars, thinks the Empire is evil. You can of the movie. You don't have to think that the events depicted in the movie are true to extract the moral viewpoint of the author. Similarly, the biblical authors clearly think it's okay to kill all the firstborn Egyptian domestic animals in the 10th plague because God does it and he's considered good. And that's the problem. It doesn't matter if you think these events happened or not. Although Mike Jones made a whole documentary claiming the Exodus did happen. So this criticism is kind of ironic.
Well, thanks for promoting the evidence. We do appreciate it.
Mike, your internet's
what-
kind of Your internet's kind of spotty. I don't know if it's just on my end though. Trent, is he?
No, he sounds kind of like a robot.
Okay.
All right. Can you guys
Not
hear
in
me
the
now?
usual way, but like a techie way.
All right. Well, why don't you guys comment on that while I fix my internet? You guys go right ahead. I will.
Fair
I
enough.
might.
I'll say
jump in
this:
and out of stuff,
it is interesting because just because you say not all Christians are going to take some of these stories literally doesn't mean that you are saying we don't take any of these stories literally.
Right.
And so, like, for him to kind of frame the fact that it's ironic that you're defending an Exodus event while also saying like we don't really believe like a global flood happened or anything like that. There's no irony or inconsistency there. That just kind of feels like it's a rhetorical jab meant to undermine and poison the well rather than anything else.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's another example of how most internet atheists operate with a kind of Christianity that's very fundamentalist, right? So we all know kind of fundamentalists who think of the Bible as just one book. And there is, of course, a unity through it. But like when somebody says, the one way to instantly know somebody doesn't know what they're talking about is if they say, do you take the Bible literally? Right?
Mhm.
We know right off the bat they don't know what they're talking about with literalness or non-literalness, because you can't treat the Bible as literal or non-literal. You have to look at individual passages, contexts, genres, authors, etc. But because Mike says, here is a passage that I don't take literally. Oh, see, he doesn't take the Bible literally, but he contradicts himself because over here he does. It's the worst kind of fundamentalist thinking that you can find.
And again, that was not our whole point on the problem of suffering. We were just pointing out, like, listen, if you're going to bring up specific examples and you're going to do an internal critique, you should recognize that, yeah, a lot of people don't take those positions. Now, again, I acknowledge he was responding to his debate opponents and we were just offering another perspective, but now he's responding to us. So take us in context, okay? Just because we say there is high geographic hyperbole in the text, that does not mean we take everything metaphorical. And the point we want to make is, yeah, we still recognize that there is this problem of suffering, which we're going to get into here today. But with those specific passages, they would not work because we would say this is hyperbolic language, not literally God wiping out every single animal on earth with a flood. So like those wouldn't work against us was our main point. Other passages, and then so notice how Phil cuts to like the 10 plagues. Okay, but yeah, that's an issue, but that was not the original context of what we were talking about. So
yeah, it's worth noting too, just really quick, because I can hear it in the back of my head. Whether it's, I don't know if Phil would say this, but I can hear a skeptic in the back of my head, kind of just going, "Well, that still doesn't solve the problem."
Right.
But like you said, Mike, we're not saying this solves the problem. This is just one consideration of many when you're looking into the whole narrative context of the problem of animal suffering in general and Phil's expanded problem of animal suffering. It's a puzzle piece, not a silver bullet. And we're not saying it's a silver bullet.
So, all right, let's play the next clip here, and then we can probably start getting into the problem of suffering a little bit here. So this is like a 2-minute clip.
I think one of my biggest problems with Phil's argument is that it implicitly is assuming utilitarianism.
Okay, just real quick. This is a major error on Phil's part, which we're going to get into. So just be ready for this.
This mistake is a whopper. There are lots of
yes, Phil, but not the way you think it is.
Different moral systems that could justify our argument against God from animal suffering. So for those that don't know, utilitarianism is the view that morality can be determined by sort of adding up the utility and disutility of sentient beings. In other words, their sort of satisfaction or dissatisfaction, their pains and pleasures, and saying what's moral is maximizing this utility. It's supposed to be an objective form of morality. Now, the argument can be run on utilitarianism, but obviously the argument doesn't depend on this. Alex O'Connor, my friend and debate partner here, makes the same argument. He isn't a utilitarian, and he said so in the debate.
When it comes to ethical decision, for example, it's well known that amongst my followers that I'm an ethical emotivist.
An emotivist is someone very, very different. The scheme is unashamedly subjective. It says moral statements are statements of emotions. So as long as you, at an emotional level, disapprove of cruelty to animals, then you can make this argument. And I think most people do have that emotional response, so it should work with most people. The argument just assumes that unnecessary suffering of animals is bad. Now, there are lots of other ethical schemes this argument can be run on, from deontology to virtue ethics to constructivism. But instead of going into those, why don't we simply use one that maybe Jesus would approve of?
All right, let's stop there for just a minute. Okay. Than Trent, PhD. Correct me if I'm wrong, but emotivism is a position in meta-ethics, and utilitarianism is a position in normative ethics. They're not mutually exclusive. You can be an emotivist, non-cognitivist, in your meta-ethics, but that does not mean you're rejecting utilitarianism in your normative ethics. Does Phil not understand the difference here?
I'm pretty sure Phil does not understand the difference. And I know this isn't a debating point, but it was so hard to listen to this at times because he's like, "Blimey, Governor, there ain't no God, isn't it?" You know, and I'm just like, can you just, I almost wanted to just read this on the transcripts, you know, the guys just was getting under my skin. But yeah, I mean, this is such a red herring. It's like the guy can't put a string of thoughts together. It's very stream of consciousness. He hears a word, he puts the words up here, but there's no like thinking or organizing or categorizing or anything. And I don't know if this is typical of this guy, but it's kind of annoying because I like a really good, I like me a good atheist, you know? I like me some Paul Draper and some Bruce Russell and some Mike Tooley and and some Mike humor. You know, I love a good atheist. But this is like atheism light, man. This is like, what it's kind of like British atheism, you know, is like British food. It's like, this isn't really satisfying.
Jeez, Trent.
I'm sorry, but I had to say it, man. I had
So
to
I mean,
say
like,
it.
it's
So-
not just a red herring. It's a flat out ish, like, actual
Yeah.
error, because emotivism and utilitarianism are not mutually exclusive. This would be like me going to a Buddhist and going, how can you claim to be an atheist? You said you're a Buddhist. Well, everyone knows you can be a Buddhist and an atheist together. Likewise, you could have a meta-ethical idea of emotivism.
I promise
and
you, none of the yoga moms in Dallas know that.
Yes. But I mean, like, your meta ethics could be emotivism, and then your normative ethic could be utilitarianism. They're not mutually exclusive. Meta ethics is what you say about the nature of ethics, and normative ethics is like what you think you ought to do in terms of, like, to live out an ethical life. Like, should you obtain virtue? Should you try to maximize pleasure? These kinds of things. So, but go ahead, Than.
Yeah, I mean, so that's one thing. The other thing that I picked up on this was, and we outlined this in our stream responding to them, right? When we're talking about the defeat condition, what that means, what kind of evil is going to be justified or compatible with God's existence, stuff like that. And so you'll notice in that clip, he says, we make one assumption, and that assumption is that the unnecessary suffering of animals is bad. But that is not the same thing as the unnecessary suffering of animals is unjustified. And that's a huge difference that I think ignores our axiology that we take into our worldview, which is kind of like one of the whole point. Like, it's part of the biggest critiques that we've had about this problem of animal suffering, that thing that Phil and Alex keep putting up, is they cannot smuggle in their own axiology into the conversation. Right. They have to adopt the axiology of the people they're interacting with.
Well, there's another broader thing that I've seen here that he does here that I've seen a lot with internet atheists, and that's they can't put an argument together, like an actual argument with premises and rules of inference and conclusions. Because one of the things that, you know, was an absolute necessity in publishing an analytic philosophy is you have to provide a logically valid argument, naming and defending your rules of inference, things like that. And this happened in my debate with Skylar Fiction, especially, where, okay, they'll say that something is bad, right? Okay, something is bad. Got it. It's bad. Right. Now what? I mean, it's like, here's a bad thing, therefore there's no God. Like, you got to throw some premises in there somewhere. You can't just enthymeme this without any comment. Because think about what exactly follows from they're identifying a bad state of affairs, or saying, okay, and it didn't have to happen. Okay, so there was some bad thing, got it. It wasn't strictly necessary, got it. Therefore, what? All that follows is that the world could have been better, but nothing follows from that. If we were here saying that this was the best of all possible worlds, then that would be a problem. And maybe he thinks, you know, he doesn't seem to really know much. So maybe he actually thinks Christians think this has to be the best of all possible worlds. Because if you notice that if you had that as your lemma in your enthymeme, then you could go from here's a bad thing, and this bad thing didn't have to be, to there's no God. But like, without such a crazy premise, you got to tell me the rest of the story, man. Here's a bad thing that didn't have to be. The world could have been better. So what?
Yeah, and I mean, again, he's going to do this throughout the video. He's going to assume like utilitarian normative ethics, and therefore, but he's also going to say this is an internal critique. Most Christians don't hold to utilitarianism, let alone a form of consequentialism. So it's like, is this really an internal critique, or is Than said, are they sneaking in their value theory, their normative ethics, and then just saying, well, Christianity is not compatible with that, God's actions aren't compatible with it, therefore problem.
Well,
okay, then at that point, this is not an internal critique anymore. It
Yes.
never was.
This is something I think that, picking up from what I just said, that you could even be a utilitarian and this wouldn't be a problem. Because since there is no best possible world, we aren't maximizers. We're what decision theorists call satisficers. There is a threshold of goodness that must be passed, but anything above that threshold is equally permissible. And there's the one illustration of this is the bottle of wine that gets better every day. When do you drink it? And Than's like, right now.
Yeah.
Um,
There's a
but-
lot of this going on because it's not just bound into the ethical considerations either. Trent, I pointed out to you, there's a lot of assumptions that go on in the background to make this argument. It seems like he's going to assume almost like a blueprint type world, or like a pick and choose model of creation rather than a disjunctive model of creation. And that's going to be a part of like the narrative complex that we'll have when we're doing Christianity and we're trying to explain animal suffering. There's so many different assumptions that go into this, and we can keep talking about that, but I think the video itself will speak to that, and we'll keep talking
but
about that.
let's put a pin in that and come back to it later, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's continue on.
Maybe Jesus would approve of. And that's Judaism. Now, Judaism isn't an ethical scheme, granted, but it has ethical beliefs. And one of them is inherent in the way that kosher food is prepared. When animals are killed in Judaism, they have to be killed by a shochet. Now, let's take a look at what the organization of Shochetah actually say is the reason for their method of slaughter. It is a cardinal tenet of the Jewish faith that the laws of Shochetah were divinely given to Moses at Mount Sinai. The rules governing Shochetah are codified and defined and are binding and valued today as ever.
Okay, I just want to just note real quick. Notice that they put in parentheses, this is coming from Deuteronomy 20 or 12:21. So just let's put a pin in that they're acknowledging, and Phil seems to be as well. This is coming from the Torah.
And they ensure a swift and painless dispatch of the animal. Infringing the laws of Shochetah renders the meat unconditionally forbidden as food to Jews. The time-hallowed practice of Shochetah, marked as it is by compassion and consideration for the welfare of the animal, has been a central pillar in the sustaining of Jewish life for millennia. Now, people argue about whether or not kosher methods are the most humane, and that's not the point here. The point is the unnecessary suffering of animals is clearly implied to be a bad thing in Judaism, and Judaism is not utilitarianism. And this is where the problems lie, because if unnecessary suffering of animals is a bad thing, then God shouldn't command it or do it, but he does. That's what happens in the 10 plagues, in the laws of Deuteronomy, in the story of Legion and the 2,000 pigs, and so on.
So notice again, he then says at the end, in the laws of Deuteronomy, suffering of animals is commanded. But then here, he just put on the text laws from Deuteronomy that are prescribing humane ways to kill animals. I was confused by this. Like, I was like, did he not see that there?
There's so
like
many
I said,
things
he
here.
can't connect things. He's like a word association type person. He doesn't
Trent,
think of thoughts logically.
maybe you can pick up on something here, because the sentence, this like broke my brain. Okay, like the sentence where it's like, granted, Judaism isn't an ethical system, or something, like he said something along the lines of that after he's describing these passages of Shahet. And then he just kind of like strung some words together, and I had no clue what he was really trying to say at that point. And I even saw your reaction where you were just kind of like, "What is?" I'm trying to get it. Like, is he just trying to find some underlying principle that like could be grounded biblically to say that we should like have compassion for animals, and then try to run the argument from there, or what is happening here?
I mean, it looked to me like he was trying to make this a counterexample to the thing that he attributed to Mike, because he says it sounded like he was saying, he thought Mike was saying you can only make a problem from animal pain if you're utilitarian. And he's saying, but here are some non-utilitarians saying that animal suffering is bad. I mean, it's a really weird, like I said, it's just kind of word association. But he does give one actual argument here. He gives a modus ponens that so good for him for giving for exemplifying an actual logical form. It was something like if something was bad, God would not a good God would not command it, but God is said to command this thing, therefore there's no God. Or the God is bad and therefore no God, right? He's getting in the realm of an actual argument. But think about the argument. Think about the argument form. X is bad, therefore a good being would not command X. What? Like that? I would say in the first 10 minutes of a college freshman discussion of the problem of evil, we're going to get past that, right? That something is impermissible because it's bad. No, he needs something more like what Than said, that it is unjustified and
Yes.
intrinsically unjustified or something like that. But that it's bad, again, it's like he's never read anything presenting the problem of evil philosophically. It's just words. It's like it's almost like, you know, he's got like God derangement syndrome, like people that hate Trump. Orange man bad is all they can say. All he can say is God bad, me no like God, God bad. He's, you know, which is, you know, his buddy is he's the emotivist in practice, is because bad, that's all he can say is something's bad. He doesn't like it.
And so like would it just be a fair response at this point, Trent, to just when he brings up the pigs, when he brings up the hamstrung horses and all that stuff, right? Would it just be fair to go in response to ask him, do you think that these are the such things that would make it impossible for these animals to look back on their life, whether ante-mortem or post-mortem, and still consider their worth life living? Or like,
Yeah, I
are
mean,
these
the
the
first
events?
question, yeah.
So what?
I mean, the first question is, you know, did these things, did God in fact command the thing with the horses? The things with the pigs is more difficult, since, you know, it was Jesus there, and it's, you got to ask, were the pigs suffering in virtue of being demonized, right? It might have been a form of euthanasia. So first, I'd back up a little bit and say, what were the reasons for these things? Was this humane treatment in the first place? But yeah, the bottom line is, since what he has to argue is that the defeat condition could not be satisfied,
Yeah.
or is highly likely not to be satisfied, would be that you couldn't look back and say, my life was, on the whole, my existence is, or has been, from this moment looking backwards to the past, on the whole a good one, and one that reflects the love of God, because people have suffered a lot more than, you know, what the pigs suffered, and looked back on their lives, even in their earthly life, and said, my life is on balance good, and my life is a life that reflects the goodness and love of God to me. So I don't know why he doesn't go for more powerful stuff. I don't know what he's doing.
Well, yeah, I think you're right. He's just assuming bad, therefore argument successful. And again, his stand has reiterated, it needs to be unjustified. It needs to be that there's no redemptive process that could redeem that suffering. And also with the pig things, like if we're talking about demonic possession, the text doesn't, if we're going on what the text says, because this is an internal critique, it doesn't say they suffered. If it's a demonic possession, maybe they completely lost consciousness and the demons took over.
Yeah,
with the 10 plague thing, how do we know the animals actually went through suffering? Maybe they were just unconscious and then died after that. Like, there's a lot of assumptions here about the text that have not even been justified, let alone the philosophical problems you guys are talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I said I would even start with his assumptions.
Yeah. So yeah. Let's get more into it. Let's play the next section here.
That's why I claim this is an internal critique, because Jews, and I think many, although perhaps not all, contemporary Christians think that unnecessary suffering of animals is bad. I mean, consider the Catholic Catechism, CCC 2418 says, quote, "It's contrary to human dignity to cause animals to suffer or die needlessly," close quote. So if God commands or allows needless animal suffering, then we have an internal tension. Now, some Christians could just, bite the bullet, follow the likes of Augustine or Descartes, and say animal suffering needlessly is fine. Well, let's hear them say so.
All right, so
whoa. Go ahead, Mike.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, you got
fine.
Trent.
Hey, Sarah, can you bring me some Advil? This guy's giving me a headache. So, first of all, that's not even what Descartes says. He doesn't say,
Right.
He believes they're automata. He doesn't say it's fine that they suffer. He says they don't suffer because they don't have consciousness. He literally thinks they're robots made out of flesh,
Thank you.
He couldn't possibly have read anything about what Cartesianism really is. Certainly couldn't have read my book and my chapter on Cartesianism, because even though I reject it, as a just by habit, professional habit, I steel man my arguments. So that was just a moment of ignorance. And then there's no like advance on anything he's said before, because he says, again, needless suffering. Oh, he also jumps from humans are prohibited from doing it, therefore God would be prohibited from doing it. That's not legitimate. Why think that? I mean, you at least have to go. We have to at least stop and say, okay, in this case, is there something? Like, I'm not one of these, neo-Thomist pantheist. God doesn't have, moral.
No,
God's not a moral.
You're gonna say that God has different rights in virtue of
there's going to be different
relative to what we did.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
And the suffering that is caused as a byproduct of some things that God did in terms of establishing the natural world is very different than what the Catechism has in mind there.
Yeah,
with humans.
For anybody that's skeptical about that idea that God could have different rights than we do, you accept that already. Just even within human relationships, like you're going to accept the fact that I have the right to discipline my children, but my neighbor doesn't. Right.
Well, Than, I've heard your kids when we are on phone calls. I think I have the right to discipline your children.
Trent, on a call today, Trent heard me tell my kids that if they don't stop slamming the door, I'm going to take their door away.
I've literally never. I said I've never heard that sentence uttered.
No, that's brilliant.
Ever. I'm going to take your door away.
No, the analogy I always use is like, it's permissible for a woman to go into the woman's bathroom. It's not morally permissible for me. So a woman has more rights in that regard right there.
It was permissible under the Biden administration. It's just no longer permissible.
I will also, Trent, I don't know what you think about this. This is something I've just been kind of toying around with in my head. But another reason to think that this could be true as well is the fact that, like, as humans, we don't have the powers and capacities to guarantee with high probability the defeat of any suffering that we could cause on somebody.
Yeah.
Where God does. And so we might default to not allowing or not permitting or not causing unnecessary suffering in light of the fact that we can't guarantee defeat.
Exactly.
Whereas God
absolutely.
can't.
The outcome, your ability to control the outcome is all important. I mean, I'm not going to perform, an appendectomy on you guys, right? But a surgeon knows exactly how to control the consequences of that action and can make that action, whatever badness there is in cutting you open and taking a part of you out, a good surgeon can pretty much guarantee that the end result is going to be positive and, in fact, a net gain in your life. And God can always do that in every circumstance.
I think also he's just assuming, again, the goal of Christianity for God is a utilitarian outlook, and it's to minimize suffering and maximize pleasure. If the ethical system God is working with is virtue ethics, God's goal is to maximize virtue, maximize plans of redemption, maximize triumph, and then minimize vice. So, like, the suffering is a side issue. It's not going to be the main goal of God. And as Than was saying, if God is omniscient, he can see the whole plan and he can bring good out of that and therefore make the suffering redemptive and worthy, as you talk about in your book. So it's like, if this is not an internal critique. Phil is not doing that. He's assuming a utilitarian outlook. Christianity is incompatible with that. Therefore, Christianity is wrong. That's not an internal critique.
On your last point, Mike, my son was right across the room from me going, I said that. That's exactly what I said. So maybe we ought to put this guy up against my son in a debate sometime.
So, all right, let's play this next section here because he's going to get into the moral argument, I think.
It seems as though this is almost appealing to emotion.
The argument no more appeals to emotion than the moral argument for God does. And by the way, Mike also
Okay, so first of all, I said it seems like it is. I didn't say it necessarily was. And the reason I said that was because again, as you had said, Trent, we're just saying God did bad thing. I don't like that. Therefore, this is a problem for Christianity. And they're not thinking about the actual logic of it all. So
makes material defending the moral argument. The moral argument for God implies there are moral facts, like murder is wrong. And if the theist can appeal to those notions without appeals to emotion, then so can the atheist. Except, one can make the statement conditional. and say if there are moral facts, then this should be wrong. As Alex said in the debate,
Making a criticism similar to what Lincoln said of slavery. If this is not wrong, then nothing is wrong. I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm not saying that it's immoral. I haven't used moralized terms. What I'm saying is that it's unexpected on the command of a loving God.
So with that, I was really confused by Phil's here. So I'm straw manning. I apologize because I did not understand his point here. I don't think anyone has ever run a moral argument by saying that, like, we're by appealing to emotion ever. Like, saying murder is wrong is not an appeal to emotion. Moral claims are not emotional claims. This was incredibly confusing, and this is the one part I just think Phil did not even present himself in a clear fashion compared to the other parts of the video.
I have nothing positive to say about that clip.
Fair enough.
Unsurprisingly.
Yeah, it didn't make sense because
I mean, in a way, though, that's not true. The best sentence of their entire video was Alex at least using the word expected on theism, right? Because that is what they have to show. At least it's the one shining light of logic that what they have to show is that it's unexpected on theism. What they don't do is show that, because it's being bad does not show that. Or it's being bad on its own. Now, if that was the only thing God brought into being was one bad thing, we'd have a problem. But it is not unexpected that there would be some bad things that would, and again, not brought about. I sort of bought into it there. God isn't, nobody on this panel so far tonight has said God brings these things about. God allows them to happen. He permits them to happen. And we all, I think, understand reasons why God would permit them to happen. There are outcomes, but at least we can say at one point in their video, they were at least logically correct in saying what they needed to do, which is to say that something was unlikely given theism. It's just that they didn't do that thing.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm going to play the next section here.
One could argue the needless killing of animals is wrong, or even simpler, we could just say the needless suffering is wrong, even if it's okay to kill. Think back to the rules of kosher food killing. What they argue is that if an animal must be killed, then it should be done painlessly. So our argument assumes that unnecessary suffering of animals is wrong. Consider Joshua 11:6, where God commands the Hebrew armies to hough the horses of the enemy. This means to sever the Achilles tendon of the horse so as to disable it in battle. Now, given God is omnipotent, he could have taken the horses out of the battle without this torture. He could have teleported them somewhere else, or he could have given them tranquilizers, but he didn't. So that is equivalent to killing an animal in a painful way when they could have done it in a painless way, which is what Jewish practice expressly forbids in the context of kosher law.
All right, Thin, you said you wanted to go on this one for a little while, so I'm going to let...
Well, I was just kind of, man, there's a lot of things we can say. In the original video, by the way, Trent, I don't know what view you take on the war texts.
I'm pretty liberal on that. I suspect that God said no such thing. I think it's reasonable that an ancient Hebrew would have either thought that or expressed it that way. But I do not personally believe that God ever commanded any such thing.
Okay, fair enough. We in our stream, Mike, we
which is not to say that I deny it. What I'm saying is I'm not a person who I do not endorse that proposition.
Gotcha. Yeah, Mike, you and I kind of explored how we interpret that text in our last stream, in a little bit, and so this is kind of where I think there's a lot, again, just hidden assumptions that are kind of sneaky. And this isn't me trying to say Phil's doing this in a nefarious way, by the way, either, when I say sneaky.
Right.
I just think that there's assumptions that get carried in just idiosyncratically. And Trent, I texted you a list of like these fallacies that I kind of made up the name for here. And the one that I think applies here is that like selective intervention fallacy. Which is the idea that like there's an assumption that because God might intervene in some places in some different ways, that he's going to do this in he's going to do it in a particular way that is going to be arbitrarily like deemed as better, or whatever you want to say in any particular instance you want to poke at. And the heart of what I'm trying to get at here is like, let's just say God did command for the hamstringing of the horses. I think there are narrative and contextual reasons that we've already addressed for this, which is, assuming that this actually happened, this is almost like God kind of, what's the word I'm looking for here? I can't find the word, Mike. Help me when you're like trying to say that this is bad, don't do this. Why am I drawing a blank right now?
Forbidding?
No, the basic idea is just like the use of war horses is seen as a bad thing because God is anti-war. Like that's what's going on in the text, I think, at this moment. It's subversive text to this is like bringing a tank, right, to a cavalry knife fight, right? This is what it would be like in the ancient Near East. And I think that's what's going on narratively in the text. And the basic idea that I'm trying to unpack here is it seems like there's just like this arbitrary measure of what would be deemed as justifiable and not justifiable here. Like anytime you're going to poke it at any particular instance and say, well, God did this, but why didn't he do this instead? That would have been better. Well, we could have also just taken that even further and been like, why didn't God just set up a world where there was no war in the first place? And it's like, where's the cutoff point? It seemed really arbitrary. But within my view, at least, and I think Trent, you would endorse this, and Mike, you would too, God doesn't set up like a blueprint of the way the world's going to come about. God set up kinds of worlds, and then there's like these boundary conditions of what's going to be allowed within that world. And this event just fits within the type of thing that would fall within that type.
Yeah, it's like guardrails when our family likes to go bowling because it's hilarious. And when my 6-year-old plays, we put up these little rails that keep her from getting a gutter ball. So there's limits, right? There's limits on how bad it can get in any direction. But there's no like, and we even put it on this little thing. It looks like a slide, and she just pushes it off, and it goes down the ramp, and she's guaranteed not to get a gutter ball. But other than that, I mean, it's not like that thing guarantees she's going to get a strike or a split or knock down 1 pin or 4 pins or anything. There's a lot in her actions and the situation that goes into that. So I think that that's the way the world is. Yes, it's what one of the best explanations of this is in my old mentor Ed Waringa's book, The Nature of God. Man, I tell you, you talk about a classic, an absolute classic. Ed Waringa's The Nature of God. And he talks about, because he was a Plantinga student, and he takes up Plantinga's idea of the initial world segment. And so God creates an initial world segment, and then there's, lots of branching futures off of that. And God can prune that in various ways as he intervenes, but it's still a branching world structure that leaves, infinite possibilities open. And so I think that I want to emphasize that point, that idea of creation is a lot better than the pick it from what I call, because Plantinga sometimes makes it sound like God's picking a world from a menu, right? Like God's got this big menu of worlds. He says, I think I'll take number. It's like ordering from. How Chinese menus have like 150 items on it. It's like God's got like this menu with an infinite number of items on it. He says, I think I'll have a number 752, and then that world. They drop it into the pot and that world comes out. That's not at all the idea of creation in the Christian mainline thought. Also, this idea of the arbitrary number of miracles. We have no idea how many miracles God enacts in a day, performs. We have none idea at all, nor do we have any way of even determining how many miracles God does in a given day. Because we wouldn't see them. He could be doing miracles all the time, and we don't know it. So the idea of like, how many miracles is God supposed to perform? Why doesn't God perform more miracles? More than what? You don't even know what your baseline is.
Yeah.
So Tham, what would you say specifically to the idea that God should teleport the horses somewhere else?
Yeah, well, again, I'm going to employ the defeat condition here, first of all. And then the other point, so at like, given that, then what Phil has to do, or the skeptic has to do, is say that this is the type of suffering that would render it impossible for those horses to have a life they consider from that point on a life on the good whole, including the afterlife, right?
Mhm.
Impossible.
Where they're given a praiseworthy status and all this other stuff.
And imagine, let's just draw that out for a second. See, what does that proposition look like? It would be something like, given infinite resources and infinite time, it would be impossible for that horse to look upon its life as a on balance good and a life consistent with a loving God.
Yes.
Mhm.
I
And then-
mean, like 1 trillion years from now in paradise, he's going to look back and be like, but there was that one time where you let me be cut, like it's just
Yeah. And then
not
there's
that
going to
it's
be
a good, it's a very bad thing, but very bad things happen to people and they become okay. They have wonderful lives.
Yeah, and so if the horses can retroactively consent to this, I don't think that there is much of an issue.
Hmm.
Add in some sort of theodicy that's going to predict something like the biblical meta narrative into the mix, for instance, and the fact that I think there's an issue here again because the technical term is like a deus ex machina, right? Which is like this unique solution that you're expecting to find to every single particular instance, which is just going to be some sort of arbitrary optimization rather than something actually being better. Because Phil could say, or anybody can say, yeah, teleporting the horses would be better. But now what's going on is you're kind of taking this one sentence in the whole entire narrative of reality, and you think that that's going to produce the same type of reality. It's hard.
Yeah,
You don't
it might
judge
be
things.
better in
You
that
don't judge things
instance.
based off of one sentence. You're going to take the whole
Mhm.
narrative arc together, not that one particular instance.
Yeah, it might be better in that instance, but suppose I am looking over at Mike and I'm like, wipe that smirk off your face, and I go to slap him, right? And then God teleports him out of the way of my slap, right? And then
Mhm.
I'm like, well, wait a second here. All right, fine. And I go to shoot him because I can't slap him, because every time I go to slap him, he teleports away. And then when I shoot him with a gun, like the bullet, I think it was Higgs, says turns into butter or something. It turns into a little chocolate, and he's catching my chocolate bullets in his teeth, right? And like what? And now we've got a world of absolute chaos where nobody can be harmed and nobody can form any virtue. I mean, is that better? Is that better?
Right.
Yeah.
That's not a better world.
And
Yeah.
that's like going back to what you were talking about. Like again, if this is an internal critique, it needs the ethical system, the normative ethical system needs to be virtue, not reducing suffering and
Yeah.
maximizing pleasure. That was not ever taken into consideration in this response, unfortunately. And that's
Yeah.
one of the main problems we keep going back to. So, all right, let's continue on. There's a lot I could say about this, but to save on time, we're going to move on.
So
Yeah.
they're quoting Trent Dougherty, and it seems like they're kind of
This guy right here, the guy we're quoting is in right here with us. So let me actually back up, because I think it'd be good for me to actually play that section there. So let me just back up a little bit here.
Of animal pain, a theodicy for all creatures, great and small. It's a must read if you're going to talk about the problem of evil in general.
So they're quoting Trent Dougherty, and it seems like they're kind of clutching at straws, grasping at any defense that might try and deflect the problem. But yet again, notice first, Mike said,
Because I don't necessarily think it's wrong to kill animals. Okay, so notice I said necessarily wrong. I don't think it is. I don't think it's okay to like torture animals for fun and kill animals for fun. I said it's not necessarily wrong. I think Phil's going to miss that part. He still is not justified that animal suffering is necessarily evil.
and I think the reason for this is that he's trying to imply there isn't really a problem to be solved. Otherwise, why make this comment? Well, the relevance here is because Doherty is actually really clear. This is what he says about animal suffering. Open quote, prima facie at least, is not at all what we would expect from an all-powerful, all-loving God. Yet it seems, prima facie at least, to be just what we'd expect, or at least not too surprising, given naturalism. Thus, until other data and explanatory virtues, especially simplicity, are taken into account, it looks like naturalism is a much better explanation of the data of animal suffering than is theism. This is surely a problem for theists, close quote. So it seems they're contradicting their own source. Now, of course, Doherty does think he can come up with a solution, but he does recognize there's a serious problem. But Mike's quote about, oh, it's not really wrong to kill animals, seems to reject that.
Notice, again, I did not say it's wrong to kill animals. I said it's not necessarily wrong, Phil. Why are you lying about what I said there? And Trent, do you think we're contradicting you because of a statement you said at the beginning of your book?
Yeah, I know. I just checked, and the phrase prima facie is in there. Now, I guess it's on me for using a Latin phrase, to a Englishman who can barely speak English. I guess he just skipped right over it. It's kind of like, people who the worst kind of readers that just skip over the words that they don't understand what they mean. So I almost want to just like say, hey, prima facie means on the face of it, right? I mean, it's like, so
Yeah.
it's that might be the most embarrassing part of an overall quite embarrassing video.
This is why we titled this 10 Corrections for Atheists, because honestly, I don't know if he thought, I don't know if he knew what that meant, because he just is interpreting everything in these weird ways. Like,
I just found this clip to be really ironic, because he starts this off by saying that we're grasping at straws by quoting Trent Dougherty. But ironically enough, he was the one grasping at straws by quoting Trent Dougherty.
Yeah.
It's pretty accurate.
I mean, it's maybe he's got like a hearing delay, like because you mentioned the word necessarily at the beginning of your sentence. I mentioned prima facie at the beginning of my sentence. So maybe he's on some kind of delay and he just misses the first part of sentences, right? Because if he includes the first part of sentences, his accuracy goes radically down.
I was just like, man, this is just a total straw man.
And the thing is, if you're philosophically minded, a word like necessarily is like glowing, right?
Yeah.
It's just like
exactly.
It's like that's not a word to skip over. And again, in the first part of a sentence is prima facie. You just look it up, man. Just Google it or something.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's why we got Trent here, folks. We're on the same page. Phil does not understand what's going on. So let's play this next section.
He's assuming a value theory is
like
utilitarianism is what Christianity teaches. And I know very little Christians that have held to that.
Doherty does focus on the importance of virtues, and he says the greatest virtue is love. But to Doherty's credit, he doesn't simply claim that this virtue is enough to defeat the problem.
Duh.
He has a whole elaborate scheme of animal resurrection, their transformation into rational beings, who then endorse their suffering. And to me, the biggest implausibility of this scheme is not even the resurrection and transformation bit, but it's the fact that animals learning of the cruelty the biblical God imparted on them will suddenly endorse those actions. That, I think, we're given no reason to believe. But note that none of this is even mentioned by Mike and Thad, and simply claiming a different set of virtues isn't going to cut it.
Okay, maybe I know you're dying inside, Trent. Just I need to get this out. Mike, I didn't go back to our OG stream to see if we did mention this. But knowing how I approach the problem of evil, I just would be so surprised if I did not mention the defeat condition and animal resurrection.
No, you did.
You can't go 2 sentences without mentioning it.
I'm pretty sure you did. And even if you didn't, we referenced Doherty's book as we're endorsing it. So that context, what's in the book, should come with what we were saying. So like, he should have taken that into account. Like, we're referring to that. Hey, we want to move on to other parts. Here's what we argue. It's in this book. Boom, let's move on. And then Phil's like, well, why didn't they mention it? Well, technically we did by even just citing the book.
Also, let me see here if it says, oh yeah, here it is where I say it. And then suddenly animals accept what their fate. No, there's no suddenly in this thing at all, man.
Yeah.
The whole context of the book is a gradual unfolding process. This could take 10,000 years, like the hymn says. I don't know how long it's going to take for anybody. The issue is, could it happen? Is it plausible that it could happen? Well, yeah. And how do we know that? Because it's happened, because people do it all the time who've suffered horribly. In fact, the sequel to this book, God, Evil, and Sainthood, delves into a bunch of research material that never made it into the book. I've got stacks of books by survivors of Auschwitz, and it's unbelievable. There's no positive correlation between being a Holocaust survivor and being an atheist. I mean, it's unbelievable, the stories of overcoming. And I mean, one of the first philosophical books I read in high school was Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and that is mind-blowing.
Yes.
Absolutely mind-blowing. And I follow TikTok accounts of Holocaust survivors, and I've got friends who have Holocaust survivors as parents or grandparents, and it's unbelievable, the spirituality that comes out of that. Now, did it break some people? Absolutely. Is that something we got to talk about and work? Yes, absolutely. But there are many, many positive examples witnessing to the fact that you can suffer in ways that are unimaginable to a blessed person like me and still come out very dedicated to God, very thankful to God, and leading a very positive existence.
Yeah. And this pokes at a fundamental difference in the way I think we're approaching the problem of evil versus the way that atheists approach the problem of evil.
And that's why this, real quick, that's why this is not an internal critique. But go on.
No, 100%. But also, I think there's also like, I'm not going to get on a moral high ground too much here, right? But I think the way that we approach this is also just on ethical grounds better than the ethical grounds that the atheist wants to approach it from. Because Trent, would you agree with like this distinction between like the sufferer-centric approach to the problem of evil and the event-centric approach?
Yeah.
And so what we're doing is we're talking about meaning making and whether or not that agent can subjectively come to endorse the life they've lived or not. Because what we think is the most important thing is what that agent becomes and how they retroactively and subjectively come to understand that suffering, however horrific it is, within the context of the whole narrative structure of their life.
100%.
And what we're in it seems to me like if you don't take that approach, what you're just further doing is actually re-victimizing and objectifying the sufferer for the sake of an argument instead of giving them some hope and meaning and all this other stuff. If you're saying that agent is intrinsically cut off, who are you to tell anybody other than yourself whether or not your life is worth meaning on the whole?
Very, very presumptuous. And you know, sometimes Christians get into the pious nonsense of saying that theodicies somehow make light of the suffering of people. It's absolutely not true. It's one of the most BS objections to theodicy there ever was. And one of the projects I'm working on right now is a book on analytic spirituality. And, you know, I was the founder of the Journal of Analytic Theology, and I'm going to be starting a journal, the Journal of Analytic Spirituality, and an analytic spirituality book series, because I've always believed from the first moment I read John Hick in high school that there was pastoral import to this way of life, and this seeing evil as being able to be redeemed and helping people see, you know, the value in their lives, and hearing the testimony. Nothing is more common than hearing the testimony of sufferers say, and I wouldn't wish it away. Would I have chosen it ahead of time? Absolutely not. But would I change? Would I go back and take that out of my life? No, because it made me who I am, and I have come to be not just comfortable with, but appreciate who I am. And helping people get to that point is an act of ministry. Doing it for ourselves is an act of healing.
Now, take that with what you just said, Trent. Let's combine it with what Than is talking about evil being bad or suffering being bad versus unjustified, in this overarching theme that God can sometimes allow or command suffering to play into that, because it's about building virtues. It's about building this redemptive arc so that people actually become better versions of themselves, people and animals, ultimately through even this life and the afterlife kind of thing. If we combine what you were saying with what Than said earlier about the overarching theme and the redemption aspect, that's the full picture, and that's what needs to be critiqued internally, and we're not getting that.
Yeah.
Well, they don't even. They're not even. They'd have to understand it to get it, and they're not understanding it. And they're not understanding it in part. I mean, just to be honest, these people do not strike me as intelligent generally. Although Alex O'Connor seems pretty smart. The Phil guy,
he's definitely smart. I think first of all, I think Phil and Alex are both smart. I
Yeah.
think they're just missing a lot of the points. I think I'm just sick and tired of Alex regurgitating Bart Ehrman at this point, but that's
Yeah.
another topic.
That's
oh, don't even bring that guy up.
Okay, yeah.
If
Don't,
you
don't
are
give me.
Bart
You're
Ehrman,
gonna
if
give me
you're
a
out
whole
there,
other type of trigger
If you're
now, Mike.
listening, I'm coming after you. I'm coming after you.
Okay.
Mm.
Oh, this is
So-
dangerous. You can't have Trent and I both getting triggered at the same time.
Yeah. So let's get to some super chats here. So base 15-year-olds better than internet atheists from Happy IP. That is my happy face.
Did you
So,
hear that, Sam?
well said, yes. Well
you
said,
got
well
mentioned on a super chat in the comments.
When will the Wendigoon collab happen? It's unavoidable and everyone wants it to happen. I'll try to make it happen. I'll start working towards that, ladies and gentlemen. I have a contact. I'll see what I can do. And we'll try to get that moving. Capturing Christianity dropped by. He said, love you all 3 years, $10 for Mike only. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Dang.
Daniel says Phil's video title is sus and IP's counter is, I guess, good. I don't know what those refer to in the culture now.
I don't know. Yeah.
Is the phrase from the beginning in John 8:44 referencing to the start of the cosmos, or is it about the start of Satan himself? I'd say it's about Satan himself from the like, and I think it's hyperbole. Like, this is what young Earth creationists often do. This. They see the word like from the beginning in the New Testament and they go, "Oh, it has to go back to the beginning."
Yeah.
It's like, dude, it's hyperbole. Jesus can say that kind of stuff without it literally, like in Matthew 19, literally man and woman are from the beginning. Therefore, the earth is 6,000 years old argument, which is nonsense because man and woman were not made on day one.
It's more
according to
like
young Earth
back in the
creationists.
day.
Exactly.
You need to understand the way that the ancient readers of these texts would have understood that language to be taken. Because I run into this objection as well with like my views on Jonah, because Jesus references Jonah and says like, just as Jonah was in the belly of the whale 3 days and 3 nights, so too with the Son of Man, blah blah blah. And then people are like, well, clearly Jesus thought like this was a literal account, but it's like, hey, does that mean like that I think Goku's a real character? Because like I use Goku, for anybody that doesn't know who Goku is, it's an anime character, right?
Nerd.
I use Goku as
I talk about Goku all the time, guys. I know all about it. I dressed up at the convention the other day, and I saw someone that dressed as Vegeta, and then we went a Kamehameha at each other.
I use Mike as a moral. Just kidding. I use Goku as a moral exemplar with my kids all the time. I'm like, look, just like Goku trains to protect the people that we love, we need to make sure we're strong to protect the people that we love.
Yeah, and for me, it's Sam Gamgee all the time. My
Exactly.
absolute moral exemplar.
Beautiful, beautiful. Much better than Goku. I think if there was a fight, Sam would win.
Oh,
I think he
absolutely.
would just
Kick his ass.
he carried all those pots and pans through Mordor.
That's right,
He's very
man.
strong. Yes.
He's a stout little hobbit. Good little football player in Rudy, too.
Splitting this in two because I have two questions. What books are good places to start learning and understanding philosophy? If we've recommended it a lot, a good place to start is honestly Philosophical Foundations for a Christian Worldview. Even if you're not a Christian, it's just a very good, simple way to explain basic things. Like the section on epistemology, the Christianity doesn't come up at all. Well, I think until they endorse their own views, but it's just a very good basic way to just start understanding epistemology. It was very helpful when I started.
And did he say does it say epistemology or philosophy generally?
Philosophy in general, yeah.
Yeah, one of the best ways is just to read the works of Richard Swinburne because
Yes.
he's read everything, and his books are divided into here's the philosophy of it, here's the application of it. Take his book like analogy. Or what's it called? From metaphor to analogy? Revelation, from metaphor to analogy. The first half of that book is amazing philosophy of language. So my favorite way to learn philosophy is just to read Richard Swinburne.
Yeah. And you can read Trent. Trent's got some pretty good books too. So
I can't say.
2, I'm asking for prayer. My marriage fell apart and I'm at rock bottom. I'm trying to fix things, but it looks unlikely. I'm doing my best to remain on community, but it feels impossible right now. Trent, I think this relates to
Yeah.
some of the stuff you were talking about
Yeah,
earlier.
no, I was actually going to just ask you to take this. So, so I've been married 31 years. How even old are you guys?
I'm 39.
How about you, Than?
Oh, I was muted. Sorry. I'm 31.
So I knew one of you was 30. So I've been married as long as Than's been alive. Mike could have been the ring bearer, but you weren't even alive, or you were an infant. And let me tell you, it's hard. It's very hard. And we've had times when our marriage was, on the rocks. The ship had faltered and gotten caught. And I want to pray for this person, and I invite this person to reach out to me personally. Find me on Facebook, DM me. I'd be happy to talk with you. My wife and I go to marriage counseling. We go on marriage, we do Valentine's Day coming up. We're going camping together. We read books together. We're in individual counseling. It is very, very difficult. And there were times when it looked like it was not going to make it. There were times when nobody looking at it from the third person perspective would ever thought that it was going to hold together. But it has, and it's better than it's ever been. Better than it's ever been now. And I really am hoping that this person will find me on Facebook and DM me or contact Inspiring Philosophy. And Mike, if this person contacts you and you can verify that it's them or whatever, please do put them in contact with me. I would love to talk to them. And I will
and
absolutely, I will pray for them.
And I
And
just really want to attest to Trent's story. Like, Trent and I have gone very deep on the details. Like, there is so much beauty in this story too. Like, the redemption that has come from the struggles that they've been through. I can't imagine like a better type of person to talk to if you're in a similar situation.
And I know a lot of this can be cold comfort when you're going through this kind of stuff, but one of the things to remember is like this, the Bible says this too shall pass, and it does mean it. And as Trent was talking about earlier, he's read accounts of people who've gone through immense, horrible suffering, and they look back on it and they can't imagine their life without it because it helped make them into who they were. And we all go through these really dark night of the soul, and just keep your head up. Know that we worship and serve a God of redemption. There will be redemption for you. It's not over. This is like the first word on the first page of an infinitely long book. So just remember that and keep your head up.
Amen.
This super chat is just for getting Trent on YouTube. I hope Trent will continue this trend and be on YouTube more frequently. I find his animal theodicy incredibly compelling. So yes, I think it's great as well. It's totally have endorsed it. Is the underdetermination of data as big of an issue for classical foundationalism as precepts make it? I don't remember that specific thing unless you guys do.
I don't think so, because it's just it pushes you towards being a Bayesian, because you got to have a prior probability distribution. I mean, that's really the only thing that the underdetermination of the data does, is it forces you to have a different. You have to have a not just the explanatory side of your epistemology, but the simplicity side as well. That you take all of the curve fitting theories and then say, okay, now we have to run them through a second filter. But as long as you have a second filter to run them through, like a simplicity account, whether it's information theoretic or ontological or whatever, then I don't think there's any problem in this at all.
Yep. That was exactly what I would want to say. So,
and this is from another fellow nerd of like Than. He says, for the Dragon Ball reference, because he loves Dragon Ball just like Than does.
You know what?
They go to the conventions all together and they put on their cool Dragon Ball outfits.
I changed into my IP shirt today for this stream. I don't know how cameras work. Gosh, but I was previously wearing a Goku shirt. Now next time
we would have had to blur it out.
Yep, some nerds just aren't as cool as other nerds. The Dragon Ball Z nerds are okay, but they're not cool as the Lord of the Ring nerds. So
I'm a Lord of
That's
the
right.
Rings nerd
That's
too.
right. There's a nerd hierarchy, absolutely. And
yeah.
and Lord of the Rings folks are at the top.
All right, I got 4 more sections to play, and I think this is the last issue on the problem of evil, and then we're gonna get to some really weird stuff.
To actually, within the laws of nature, to create big brains, humans, through an evolutionary process where you get us to where we are without getting sustenance from meat.
Yeah.
It might be, but I think that you'd have to have some sort of supernatural intervention.
So
yes,
real quick, what I'm trying to explain here, though, is like, so God cannot break the laws of logic. It's like, think of it like this in terms of chemistry. Like, can God create an atom that has a completely different number of neutrons and protons and is still an iron atom? No, that'd be logically impossible because it would just be a different element at that point. Like, can God create an iron atom that has this protons and neutrons and electrons of a hydrogen atom? No, that'd be absurd. So if there are certain laws bound in physics like that, it follows there may be certain logical constraints on chemistry and biology. You may not be able to get a universe from an evolutionary process where you don't get big brains without something like meat consumption. Like, that just might be a constraint of logic on the natural laws itself. So that's what I was trying to emphasize there. Therefore, this might be the only type of world that could exist where you actually get species like humans that have big brains, which are necessary for making moral choices. So that's what I was trying to iterate there.
yes, of course, we're talking about supernatural intervention. And why couldn't God do that? Let's hear what Van has to say.
I think this is a.
And I think you said Van there, so
That's okay. I get that all the time. I don't blame full explanation for animal suffering or the problem of evil or anything. It's just a puzzle piece, right? And it's called the nomic regularity theodicy. And the basic idea is like what you said. You're just going to have fundamental laws that the universe abides by, and the only reasons why God would intervene are going to be places where he suspends those things or interacts with the world in such a way that it wouldn't occur. In other words, miracles, right? Had he not intervened. And the whole entire point is, well, God would want to create a universe where there's nomic regularity, because if there's not nomic regularity, we can't learn things about the way reality abides. I wouldn't be able to really access too many moral truths, because if there's no more nomic regularity, if I punched Mike in the face one time, he'd really like it.
So he's appealing to God's desire for a law-like regularities in the world. These, Dan argues, are required for moral choice to be possible. But we could still have moral choice if we couldn't metabolize meat. There's lots of things we can't metabolize. There's a species of bacteria that can metabolize nylon. We can't. Does that rob us of our moral choice? Of course not. And God gave out commandments for not eating pigs. So he's clearly fine with intervening in human diets. God also does miracles. So I guess this nomic regularity isn't so important. And
okay, I think we got the point. Okay, he doesn't
God
understand
does
the point I was
miracles,
making.
so he doesn't care. The whole entire point of a miracle is that it's broadcasted against the backdrop of nomic regularity. Like, what would a miracle be if there were not consistent laws of nature?
As the postcard says, if everything was a miracle, nothing would be a miracle.
He doesn't understand the argument I'm making. I'm not saying like we need to be able to metabolize everything. I'm saying there might be logical constraints on the laws of nature to get.
No,
to
it's a
big
good
brains.
example of how he does this word association where he hears you say something about needing to metabolize something, and he's like, no, there's nothing we need to metabolize. And it's like, again, not anything to do with what I was saying.
Yeah, nothing to do with what I was saying. Exactly.
And even if he thought that there was, that it could have gone other ways, they never at least go through the process of having that thought. Because with Van Inwagen, his example is always transparent iron. Could God make transparent iron? He's like, it's just logically impossible. Okay, so suppose that God could have made big brains through a different process. Maybe it's some really high protein coconut or something. Well, still, is it going to have animals? Are they good? Is that world going to have? Are they going to be made of meat? Tasty meat. There's it's not like that would solve the problem anyway. So your point is enmeshed in an evolutionary process is going to have outcomes that are, from your standpoint, not ideal, that you may not pick ahead of time. But so they fail to appreciate, the role that sort of randomized natural processes they're gonna have some negative consequences somewhere. The idea that you're gonna, and not only that, but like, if let's say God could make it all work out perfectly, that's not the point. As you keep saying, the point is not to live in a garden of delight. The point is to live in a world to become, to grow from virtue to virtue in breadth and depth with all of our all throughout our lives and throughout our afterlife.
But Trent, and I hear this in the back of my head, animals can't experience that.
But they can. Certainly they could, and they've got no evidence whatsoever that they can't or won't.
Yeah, it was totally missing the whole point of what I was saying. But you think that's bad? Wait till you see what he says here.
About the moral intuition not to needlessly harm animals. And that came from Christianity.
Hold on, let me
It's
back
hard
up
to
there.
take this.
Be like, well, what moral?
Apology.
So my response to this would almost be like, well, what moral intuitions? Most of our moral intuitions come from Christianity today.
So here we're talking about the moral intuition not to needlessly harm animals. And that came from Christianity. It's hard to take this one seriously.
Is that so?
As I pointed out in the debate, the Jain religion is hundreds of years older than Christianity, and its highest spiritual duty is anhisma, which is a sacred vow not to harm other living beings, including animals.
That's right, folks. The Western morality system came from Jainism, this tiny religion in India, had barely any influence. It wasn't Christianity. All our moral foundations come from Jainism, guys. You heard it here, folks.
In the last survey, in the last census, there were in the Western Hemisphere, there were 13 Jains.
Probably. Yeah. No, that's missing the whole point.
Mike, is this the mistake? Because you know more about this than I do. Is this the mistake he's making? Because if I'm going to try to interpret this as charitably as possible, maybe he's saying like, look, Jainism is older, and this is like where we see these things before the onset of Christianity. So you can't say Jainism brought these moral intuitions we have to the West, because Jainism was before Christianity. Like, is that the argument here? What?
Maybe, but I mean, like, that doesn't change the fact that Western values and duties.
Yeah, it doesn't follow.
It doesn't follow at all. Like, yeah, we acknowledge values we find in Christianity can come about in other cultures. No one has ever denied that. That doesn't change the fact that Western values are our capacity to want to spread to have empathy and spread love and try to reduce harm. Westerners think this because they're getting their values from Christianity. This is one of Tom Holland's main points in his book Dominion. The Romans didn't think this way. The reason we think this way in the West now is because of so much Christian influence that has saturated the culture. And that comes from scholars like Brian Tierney, Nicholas Wolterstorff, John Witt Jr., Samuel Moyne. I mean, it's not just Tom Holland who says this. It's several scholars that have said the reason why the West has such a strong emphasis on empathy, reducing harm, trying to help as much, spread love, and not the ancient Roman values, which they prize more of all, which are things like courage and honor. And let's decrease mercy because mercy makes us weak, as they would have said in certain instances. The reason why we have these values today is because of so much Christian influence on the West. Just noting that other cultures have had similar values, like Jainism, doesn't change the point I was making. Like, you can't get mad at Christianity for giving you these certain values and then using those values to attack the very foundation you got them from. That's the whole problem that Tom Holland is highlighting in his book Dominion. These atheists are attacking the Bible and Christianity because they have certain values they got from that very book. It's an odd argument they don't seem to get.
Yeah, it's another example of how this guy does not think in terms of logical arguments at all. It's just pure word association. It's Christianity did X. And he's like, no, Christianity did not do X because some other thing does it. Like,
Yeah.
no, there's no mutually exclusive there, you know. It's like Than made popcorn. No, he didn't, because one time Mike made popcorn. Like but your popcorn came from Than. Because
Great analogy.
You were eating out of his bowl.
Yeah, that's a great analogy to kind of put in simple terms what I was trying to get at. Like, it's just a fact that historians note that a lot of our values around empathy, love, come from the Christian tradition in the West. I mean, again, I'm currently working on a script right now called How Christianity Created Human Rights. And like, this isn't even controversial among historians who've written on human rights. They're all like, oh yeah, Christianity was heavily and crucial for the development of this. Like, there's no way around it at this point. That's wow. All right, let's get to the okay, this is another one where he doesn't seem to get the problem here. Okay, so we're going to talk about the language of the Bible in terms of speech act theory and how God can use the language of the people of the day without endorsing things like a solid firmament or a flat earth.
Having a solid dome called the firmament. And we have good reasons to think the authors believe this. The Hebrew word raka used implies it, surrounding cultures believed it, and the Bible describes it as holding up the waters above and being firm as a mirror of cast metal. Talmudic rabbis debated how thick it was.
I mean, this is such a hit and miss. It's like, dude, speech act theory solves all this. I mean, like, when we say the sun is rising, do we actually mean the sun is moving? No. Like when I say I got a gut feeling, do I actually think feelings are in my gut? No. God can use the language of the ancient Near East to
Notice I said God can use the language because Phil's about to miss that.
give theological truths.
Here, Mike is appealing to language being able to convey meaning in a non-literal way. So take his example of the phrase, the sun is setting. Now, if someone says that, we know they don't mean the sun is literally moving, but only apparently moving. That's right. But we only know this because of the cultural context of the person saying it. They are unlikely to believe in a geocentric solar system with the Earth at its center. Instead, we take it for granted that they believe in a heliocentric model with the sun at the center. In that context, we know that a person isn't to be taken literally. But if the person was a geocentrist, then we would have good reason to think they are meaning this phrase literally. Now, I pointed out that the solid dome of the sky mentioned in Genesis was widely believed in the surrounding cultures. It was described in the Bible as being made of solid metal. It was believed to be solid by leading rabbis for centuries and leading church figures from Augustine to Martin Luther. It has an etymology that implies it's solid and is described as holding up the waters above, which it can only do if it's solid. That gives us a lot of context that it should be taken literally. So the justification Mike uses in his sunset case just doesn't apply here. We have every reason to think that the biblical authors really did believe the sky was solid.
Okay, notice I said God can use the language of the day. Notice what Phil shifts to. Well, the biblical authors thought it was solid. I agree the biblical authors probably did think the sky was solid and the earth was flat. That is completely not the point I was making. The point I was making is God can use the language of their day, even though they had those beliefs, to give theological truths. It was on what God knows and says and thinks, because that's what's important, not beliefs that the biblical authors didn't include in the biblical text. Notice the shift from God to biblical authors.
Yeah.
That was a straw man.
During
ahead,
the video, my son pointed out, he's like, actually there is a dome. It's called the atmosphere. You know, and it is solid, very solid relative to its surrounding, you know, what's above it and below it. I mean, it's solid enough that things bounce off of it. Most things bounce off our atmosphere. Certainly, it's like a big curved windshield that makes life possible here. If anything, it's almost like wow, they had a pretty good premonition there.
Yeah.
I mean,
And-
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Van.
All I was gonna say is just I really don't understand how you can argue that this is some sort of evidence against Christianity being true unless you're just like working on this weird fundamentalist monolithic understanding of
100%.
Christianity. Because like it almost seems like assumed in the background. Again, wow, surprise, another assumption maybe happening here, but assumed in the background might be just some sort of dictation model of inspiration rather than some sort of dynamic view of inspiration. And on top of that, I don't really know why you would think if the biblical meta narrative is true, like God chose a family to work with and bring about some special revelation and eventually like the salvation of humankind in the whole world through that family, through Jesus Christ. Like, why would you expect God to inspire the biblical authors and the communities in such a way that they're going to have some weird scientific understanding and rob humanity of the good of scientific discovery from the outset? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, here's the analogy I use. If we had a time machine and we could figure out, like, if we could make the timeline better, if we go back and we prevent, like, the Egyptians from losing this one battle. So we go back in time. Now, they believe the sun moved around the earth. And I said, listen, when the sun rises tomorrow, there's going to be an army coming. You got to get ready. Believe me with all your heart. Okay. Ancient Egyptians believed emotions were in the organs. They believed the sun moved through the sky. Did I lie to the Pharaoh? No, I did not. I'm using language in terms of speech act theory to give the illocution. You don't take the locution of my word, which is the literal meaning. God could do something similar. He could say, listen, as the sun rises tomorrow, I want you to do X, Y, and Z. Now, the ancient scribe, the ancient Hebrew, will think the sun is moving around. That doesn't mean God is going to take those beliefs, and nor is the biblical text implying that we have to take those beliefs. He's using the language of the day. This is why I said speech act theory is important for reading this. Again, it's about what God believes and what he's saying, not what the biblical authors believe. Phil shifted to that, making his whole argument a straw man.
Well, it's just a typical internet atheist fundamentalist. And with the decline of fundamentalism within Protestant Christianity, it's like the only fundamentalists left are atheists. They're the only people left with like ridiculously flat-footed, literalistic interpretations of Scripture that believe that every single word of Scripture is God speaking, like he's like an audiobook, right? Like
the Bible's the Quran.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. All right. So this last section's a little long. I want to play it all the way through, though, because this is getting into one of my favorite areas to study, which is sociology. And Phil is, again, going to miss the whole point here. So research done in the United States and a cross-cultural investigation has found that religiosity, specifically Christianity, is associated with more pro-friendly environmental behaviors. In fact,
This mistake is really bad.
is that
And
right?
it shows Mike clutching at straws yet again. There's a big difference between environmental concern and acceptance of climate science. You can be concerned about the quality of your water, about the quality of your air, about whether there are dangerous chemicals in your food and so on, without believing in climate change. Consider Trump, who said,
We have some incredibly talented people that know environment and what we're doing probably better than any people on earth. From day one, my administration has made it a top priority to ensure that America is among the very cleanest air and cleanest water on the planet. We want the cleanest air. We want crystal clean water. And that's what we're doing. And that's what we're working on so hard.
Yet we all know Trump is very clear he doesn't believe in climate change.
So Obama's talking about all of this with the global warming and that a lot of it's a hoax. It's a hoax. I mean, it's a money-making industry, okay? It's a hoax.
And so one can care about some environmental issues or even a lot without believing in climate change. Mike has just confused the two. Indeed, the two studies that Mike shows are about environmental concern. One study doesn't even look at Christianity, but instead religion around the world. Don't forget, the target of my attack was Christianity. The example the paper gives about faith and environmental concerns coming together, in this particular case, it was Christianity.
Yeah, the paper did include Christianity. Thank you, Phil.
Was when religious leaders persuaded local fishermen not to dynamite fish. What's that got to do with climate change? Nothing. The other paper was about spending on environmentally friendly products, and it didn't even actually involve studying people's real spending, but rather self-reported expenditure. So I'm a bit skeptical about these findings. But again, even if they're absolutely valid, it's got nothing to do with climate change. Whereas the poll I showed was a direct question about belief in climate change. And what we see is a staggering difference. Atheist acceptance of climate science is around 90%, double that of Christians as a whole, and about 3 times that of evangelicals. This is enormously important because it may change the fate of the world. Evangelicals vote for Trump, they don't believe in climate change, and they don't believe in evolution. They distrust scientists and elect people like Trump, who rather than tries to fight climate change, says,
I will also declare a national energy emergency. We will drill, baby, drill.
it seems reasonable to suppose that at least one reason evangelicals distrust scientists is their holy book contradicts what science says. This is why I say this could be one of the most horrific legacies of Christianity. If you want to know the harm of these religious ideas, look no further.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack here, and it's just
Yeah.
wrong for so many reasons. For one,
Can I
he seems
ask
to
Orange
be
man
one-
bad. Orange man bad.
Can I ask one question really quick, Mike? Before I might forget. What is it about like global warming that Phil thinks? And this is a serious question because I don't actually know. What is it about like global warming that Phil thinks contradicts the Bible?
Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't. I mean, he seems to think that because Christians reject climate change, they're anti-scientific, and they might be getting this from the Bible. That's what I gathered from that, and that's of course wrong, which I can get into here in a minute here. But
Even
Yeah,
if
I've
his
just like
argument-
never in my life heard a Christian, and I'm friends with like really fundamentalist people too, by the way. Never heard that once, that like the rejection of climate change is because of anything the Bible says.
exactly.
Well, what he said was, again, he came really close this time to an actual logical argument. And he said, because he said they must reject it. They probably reject this or something because their holy book contradicts science. So
Yeah.
like, that's what I wanted. Their holy book contradicts science. Therefore they reject all science. Yeah. I mean,
Well-
this is where I really want him to put
Yeah,
the
this is
argument
where
down.
Mike's
I want him to write the argument down.
Yeah, okay, so there's a lot of problems here. One, he doesn't get the point I was making. The studies show that religiosity is tied to pro-environmentally friendly behaviors. If climate change is an environmental issue, then Christianity is going to be a variable encouraging people to address that in certain ways. That should just follow. This sharp distinction he's trying to make between climate change and pro-environmental behavior is really strange. I don't know of any environmentalist that would make that kind of thing. So one of the things they point out in the papers is that a lot of the anti-environmental issues don't come from religiosity. They come from political conservatism. That's the factor driving it. And that's important to consider because there are multiple variables that go into people's beliefs. They're saying the anti-environmental ideas are not coming from the religious variable in these people. It's coming from political conservatism. What Phil is doing here is he's doing a bivariate means comparison. This is fallacious for a number of reasons. He's just saying, well, let's see. We have Christians over here. They reject climate change. Therefore, it's probably coming. It could very well be coming from their biblical texts. Okay. You know who uses bivariate means comparisons all the time? Avid racists, like people like Amy Wax, who will say things like, look at how white Vermont is and look at how low crime there is. That's odd. Louisiana's got high minority rates and they've got a lot more crime. This must mean white skin leads to lower crime rates. That's absurd. Phil would reject that. We all reject that. And that's a bivariate means comparison. You're looking at two things and you're trying to draw a meaningful distinction or a meaningful outcome from that. Gregory Paul did this in his nonsensical studies from a couple years ago. And, Matt Dillahunty and Aaron Ra were citing them like crazy, even though they were nonsense. So you can't just look at two variables. You got to look at multiple variables to try to get that kind of thing. Now, when we look at
at the variable of Christianity, it does not lead to things that we would determine to be anti-scientific or anti-environmental. The studies I show, they're not anti-environmental. But I mean, other research as well has shown that, for example, that a lot of the variables we see with Christianity do not lead to anti-scientific aspects. For example, just a study from 2 years ago, Christianity science compatibility beliefs increase non-religious individuals' perceptions of Christians' intelligence and scientific ability. This study basically showed that a lot of the ideas that Christianity are anti-scientific come from cultural ideas. When you actually, they did 2 studies in this paper. And the first one, they showed that a lot of anti-theists, not atheists, have biases against Christians and just believe they're anti-scientific. But when were in the second study, they demonstrated that when they showed Christians were competent in science, those beliefs started to go away. Eklund and Scheitel's book, Religion versus Science, they do all these surveys, and they conclude that after 5 years of research, here's what we know. Religious Americans of all types are interested in and appreciate science. They're open to accepting new narratives concerning the origin and development of life on Earth. They are not inherently hostile to environmentalism or technological progress. That's on page 139 of their book. So there's no research here that shows that Christianity is tied to anti-scientific ideas or anti-environmental ideas. 2 variables I thought were related to climate change. Apparently not, according to Phil. So that's a problem there. The other problem is in here, and I'll show my slides now, is that historians of science will tell you that Christianity was crucial for the development of science. So Phil wants to say the Bible was somehow causing...
Did you mean to show your slides, Mike?
I got them, yeah.
There.
The Bible was somehow anti-scientific and it leads to this anti-scientific narrative. No, Noah J. Efron says historians have also found that notions borrowed from Christian belief found their way into scientific discourse with glorious results. The very first notion that nature is lawful, some scholars argue, was borrowed from Christian theology. The ironic thing is Phil is saying, well, the Bible is going to lead to anti-scientific stuff and we're going to all die from climate change. Sir, we wouldn't have science if it wasn't for the crucial element of Christianity. Christianity wasn't the only element that gave rise to science, but Noah J. Efron knows it was a crucial element that gave rise to science. Without it, we wouldn't even have the science we have now to be talking about it. So for him to suggest the Bible led to anti-scientific views is completely backwards when you study history of science. So that's a huge problem there. He's not justified that somehow from, again, mere poll data, which is a bivariate means comparison, the variable of Christianity leads to anti-environmental behavior, or that it leads to anti-scientific behavior, or it leads to anti-climate change behavior. When you look in the studies, they're tying that to political ideologies, not the variable of religiosity. Again, it'd be like me saying that, oh, yeah, because of vegan, they get so angry when every time I deal with them, they're always super angry. This means veganism causes anger. No, you can't do that. That's a bivariate means comparison. You got to do more like a multivariable analysis with robustness checks. Phil is not doing that. And he thinks he can just somehow show Christianity leads to anti-climate change and anti-science from one poll is absurd.
Although I do think veganism does make people angry.
Anything you guys want to add in before I continue? Because I have more to say.
Well,
for me, I'm just... What's the argument here? If Phil's listening to this, I'm sorry, but this just comes off like this is how I'm feeling at the moment. It just comes off like you're just angry about politics, American politics, and you've attached them to Christianity.
Exactly.
And are using this to make an argument against Christianity, but it's just kind of like it feels like you're showing your cards.
He held back
rather than making an argument against Christianity. I don't know. I don't know if that's fair, but
yeah, as long as he could, he held back the Trump derangement syndrome as long as he could. And then towards the end, it had to come out. It just had to come out. Orange man bad.
So I mean, just to recap. Okay, again, it's very odd to try to just disconnect climate change from pro-environmental behavior and thinking. If climate change is an environmental issue, the variable Christianity will help with that, as the research I showed demonstrated. Second of all, the Bible has been crucial for the development of science. How is it an anti-scientific book when it was crucial for the development of science? And also, one of the things he's not showing in terms of poll data is in terms of support for nuclear energy. So Michael Schellenberger, who's an environmental activist, and has spent his life doing this kind of stuff, says the only way we're going to solve climate change is through nuclear power. Well, guess what,
100%.
ladies and gentlemen? Guess what? When you actually look at the data, who's been holding back nuclear power for the past 50 years? Lo and behold, it's liberals, not conservatives, not evangelicals. It's liberals. They've been holding back nuclear plants. And Michael Schellenberg does note this in his talks. Really, it's Republicans, conservatives that have been far more favor of nuclear power. So even though Republicans tend to deny climate change, they're actually supporting the thing that's going to be the best solution. They're actually contributing to the thing that's going to solve climate change, even though they don't believe in it. Meanwhile, liberals are becoming a huge problem in preventing nuclear power plants from being built, which is going to be the solution. If you should blame anyone on the continuation of climate change, first of all, blame China and India, who are putting out a lot more carbon emissions than the West, or at least equal to, but also blame liberals for getting in the way of nuclear power. Another poll data from, let me see if I can put this up here, shows that church attendance, here, I can get it up here. I need to just switch it. Did I get that right one up there? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, 49% of regular churchgoers favor building more nuclear power plants compared to 43% of those who attend service less often. So again, church attendance and conservatives are more in favor of the one of the best solutions to climate change, which is nuclear power. So if Phil wants to complain that somehow conservatives are going to lead to this horrible destruction of the environment and climate change, okay, then let's not talk about the actual denial of the science. Let's talk about who's going to be most in favor of the solutions, like nuclear power. Again, that would be conservative Republicans and churchgoers. Okay. He should really be scolding liberals for getting in the way of the biggest solution to climate change.
Yeah, for sure. And let's just underscore the non sequitur that he gave there. So you bring up the studies about environmentalism, and he says that's not the same, and then goes on to it's therefore irrelevant. I mean, think of that. That's his inference. Non-identical, therefore irrelevant.
That's a good point.
Exactly.
That's a horrible inference pattern. The question is it positively
That's like-
correlated or not? And
that's like-
I haven't.
that's
I'm
like-
going to admit I haven't looked at the studies, but I'm willing to bet $1 to a dime that environmental concern positively correlates with things that promote the health of the environment.
Right.
Yeah, that's like-
exactly.
Imagine-
including the climate overall.
Imagine you're accused of like stealing something, and then as a character witness is like, yeah, Trent has never been in a fight, he's never gotten a speeding ticket, he's never done any of these things, XYZ. And then somebody goes, yeah, but you haven't talked about his like how he behaves when he's around money that's left unattended. So that's not a character witness. Like
Yeah.
analogously, like that's what's going on.
Exactly. It's analogous. Yeah. And again, like, how would you not look at variables and say and try to disconnect pro-environmental behavior with climate change? That's a crazy kind of a disconnect. I would not see any sociologist make. But again,
Yeah,
there's no reason to think. Go ahead.
Yeah, just every sociologist worth their salt is doing multivariate analysis and understands that you can't go flat-footedly from a person's how they conceptualize their own behavior to what the outcome of the behavior is. Like as you pointed out, people unbeknownstly, support stuff they don't even realize they're supporting anyway. And so once again, he's a very not subtle thinker. It's just everything is word association.
It's association.
No actual logic or reasoning.
Yeah. Again, even if Christians deny the science of climate change, that has nothing to do with the solutions to climate change. Because again, Christians seem to be in favor of the best solution, nuclear power, which environmentalists like Michael Schellenberger have been screaming from the rooftops, we're not going to solve this problem without nuclear. It's liberals, the majority of liberals that are against nuclear power. So if anyone's to blame, if climate change gets out of hand and causes all these problems, it's not going to be Christians, because Phil is talking about just the actual acceptance of the science, which has nothing to do with the actual issues regarding the solutions to climate change. So,
and I'll bet you anything,
total non sequitur.
I'll bet you anything too that if you look at it carefully, it's not the case that even conservatives don't believe in climate change. they typically just don't believe that it is primarily man-made, or
Yeah.
wholly
Yeah.
man-made. Most of them will just, that's what most conservatives that I know are denying. I don't know any of them actually that deny global warming. Even they just say that global warming, they'll say things like, well, global warming was happening 10,000 years ago, the little ice age. Now notice if somebody that says that, they're not saying, not only are they not denying global warming, they're affirming it. They're just giving an alternative non-anthropocentric explanation. So Phil would do well to like look at the subtle data distinguishing between those two features as well. But that sort of subtlety is just lost on him, as
Yeah.
apparently are all subtleties.
Yeah. I mean, like, total miss. I'm so sick, and it's a pet peeve of mine because I've dealt with the Gregory Paul stuff in the past. It's just like people trying to refute actual multivariable analyses by citing poll data. Like, it's just, atheists do this all the time. It's like, look at what the actual studies show. You're trying to make too many inferences from a bivariate means comparison. That's absurd.
Do we have a theory about why internet atheists can't think in sort of careful, sequential, logical ways? Is it because they don't like write books and papers, and it's just all video, and so everything is stream of consciousness? Or
I don't know. I don't
I'm-
want to psychoanalyze. I don't know.
Yeah.
but it's an interesting phenomenon, right? I mean, there do exist intelligent atheists who form arguments. Why can't anybody on YouTube do it?
Phil
I
wrote
don't know.
like granted, Trent, you and I've read that paper and we found issues with this paper, but
Yeah.
like on a paper, he seemed able to do it. But yeah, like Mike said, we shouldn't psychoanalyze or anything like that. It's just it is really frustrating to deal with though, because you're darned if you do, you're darned if you don't at this point. I feel like on the internet right now as Christians, it's like,
well, it's going to be difficult for me to respond to that paper without sounding really rude. It's a lot easier to respond to. I've responded to plenty of responses to my work, but this one gets so much so wrong, and it was shown in one frame of the video there earlier on during that section, and I looked at it and I was like, this presents a real challenge for me, not from a logical standpoint, but like, how do I not come off as a total jerk in responding to this? Because there's so many just non sequiturs. It's a lot easier to point out that an inference rule doesn't work universally, that an argument has a hidden premise, that something is invalid, that, those are easy things to do. It's a lot harder to just say, this doesn't follow from that. How do you show it doesn't follow from that? Well, sometimes they're so disconnected that it's hard to, somebody says, ducks are edible, and so I'm going to have chicken tonight. And it's like, there's something wrong there, but how do you even explain what's wrong? Because they've got nothing to do with one another. And it's a real shame that paper got published, really. It sort of brings down the quality of that journal, but I mean, I guess I'll write a reply to it.
All right, that'd be cool. I can't wait to read it. Let's get to some super chats here. So, if we are children of God, made in His image, and co-heirs with Christ, Jesus calls us gods and lives in us. Why aren't we gods ourselves? Very sus. Well, I would first say, what do you mean by God? Because I don't think that's what Jesus meant when He was citing Psalm 82 in John 10. I don't think He was saying that we are gods. I don't think He was saying that at all. I think He was saying, listen, the Hebrew scriptures say there's other Elohim. Why are you upset that I am claiming to be on a level with the Father? So He was not calling us gods. I don't think He actually does that. This is just going to based on different understandings of that. But I'd follow Heiser on this.
yes.
Michael.
Well, and I'm a theosis guy, so I mean, there's a sense in which we are gods. We're gods in the infant or toddler stage, because we will be bound up because of the hypostatic union. We'll be bound up in the divine nature, and we will become beings with enough power and knowledge to, certainly beyond what the Greek gods were. And so another way to think about this is that we are gods, but we're growing into our divinity.
Mhm. Yeah, I would agree on the theosis stuff. I am cautious about calling us gods because I think that just gives the wrong impression to what people mean by that in today's day and age.
I've seen Than, pictures of Than in the gym. He might be a god.
All right, guys, stop flirting. Seriously. Thoughts on John J. Collins' apocalypticism work? I do not remember it off the top of my head.
Never heard of him.
Said. I did look into it once. I wasn't convinced by some of it, but I cannot remember specifically what we're referring to here. Animal suffering being redeemed is pretty high up there in what I perceive to be obvious theological inferences. I don't know how this isn't the majority view. I think it is for Christian philosophers, but I'm not sure.
I do think that it is something that is obvious upon reflection, and maybe I think we're going to be out of time to focus on this now, but at some point in time, I'd really like to, break down that part of the book where I show that it's in the section called Not So Bare Theism, and I'd really like time to sort of draw out that thought and really open that up for people, that this is just baked into the pie from the very beginning.
Yeah. Well, maybe we could do a stream on that one day.
It's
if you want to do that.
Yeah, this is the stuff that Tim and I yap at you about, Mike, with the with our narratival case and stuff like that too. So
I mean, I'm all in on that. That's why I put forward my idea called the law of triumph, that God is imbued a law that creatures can use their suffering for redemptive aspects. This is called the law of triumph. God is trying to create as much triumph in the universe as possible. So this redemptive arc, triumph makes the greatest of all possible worlds, is what I would argue.
On the super chat really quick too, I do have one thought on this too, which is it could just be the fact that it's not the majority because of what Trent said, which is it's pretty obvious upon like thoughtful reflection, but a lot of people just are too busy to think about these types of things.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say this, the majority of the time when I'm talking to Christians about this topic, you bring it up and it's like the lights go on and they're like, yeah, that's obvious. Like, why didn't I think about that?
Exactly.
Like, so
yeah,
it's something worth noting.
He also says, my dog exhibits virtues daily, bravery in guarding our home, patience as she learns and practices tricks, and loyalty as our relationship grows daily. Yeah.
And finds meaning, right? Like I have a dog, Trent, you have dogs, people have dogs. Like you can tell when the animal is finding meaning in their life based off of the way like they're communicating with you non-verbally. Like,
for sure.
When you're petting the dog and cuddling the dog and all that stuff and saying, oh, who's a good boy and stuff like that. I don't know about cats, Mike, but like you can tell that the animals are like having a good time. They're like they're happy to be there and be alive.
There is a fulfillment and a satisfaction in the telos being achieved for these animals.
Now imagine how much more the animal achieves.
The question, of course, is how low does it go? Like, this is the one thing I've always wondered. Like, I think mammals are in terms of to be able to build virtues and make moral choices to some degree. But, like, how low does it go in terms of the brain development? I
have a generic answer to that, which is as low as it needs to. And all I mean by that is like wherever there's moral significance such that it would like render that entity like morally significant enough that it should be taken into account into these equations, right? That's how low the bar goes.
I somewhere in I think the Cartesian chapter, I say that what matters is that they vary jointly in proportion. So the greater the ability to suffer, you're always going to have a proportional ability of consciousness, and the lower you go in the ability to suffer, the lower the lower ability you go in manifestation of consciousness, the lower ability you have to suffer in any way. So they're going to vary jointly together, and that's the important thing.
Yeah. Atheists respond like Ken Hovind is still around. Yeah, it seems like that. Liberal here, at least center left, and I'm in favor of nuclear power for environmental reasons. I think it's insane that my fellow liberals aren't on board for the reasons you suggest. Yes, thank you, Maverick. I totally agree with you. This is, again, the best solution to climate change is actually, ironically, promoted by a lot of people who don't believe in climate change, or human-induced climate change, that is. So it's just kind of one of those ironic things. Phil wants to blame this on Christians, but Christians are the ones that are actually in favor of more of the solutions to it. So he should really be mad at atheist liberals for getting in the way of nuclear power. We should have the country of the U.S. should be filled with nuclear power. One of the reasons we aren't is because in the late 70s there was so much push against it from the left, and now we're starting to go realize nowadays we should have more nuclear power plants, but we don't, unfortunately. Most people, internet atheists and lay people in general, aren't trained in logic and critical thinking, which in my opinion should be part of the K-12 education.
Homeschool, baby.
Yeah. Excuse me. Many pushing climate change initiatives seem to be anti-humanist, verging on demonic, global population reduction, civilization versus nature. And I think that is a problem too. I think that one of the reasons a lot of people reject climate change is because they feel it's been made too political. A lot of the solutions, like people on the left put forward, is massive government control. And then people on the right go, well, hold on. I'm not for that. Therefore, I'm against the climate change stuff. They start to associate. If we could have more bipartisan initiatives, I don't think it would have been there. But again, a lot of the push came from the left that wanted more authoritarian leftist policies, which upset people on the right. And so then it just became a political issue and didn't need to.
Yeah. Back when Obama was running the first time against John McCain, their environmental policy, their platforms were almost absolutely identical.
Something the problem of evil, how can rape in particular be defeated with the problem of evil? So so go ahead.
Well, I mean, in certain respects, it's one of the ones that's defeated the most in terms of horrificness of event and frequency of even this worldly defeat, because in even though it's rare that it results in the birth of a child, I've known 2 or 3 women who conceived in that way, and they wouldn't even dream of undoing that horrific event. And the identity they found in the motherhood of those children is something that redeemed their past in a way that they would never take the opportunity to go back and undo it. And I mean, look, it's a horrible thing, but it's not the worst thing that anybody's ever suffered. And people are, again, look, the Holocaust is find me something worse. That's as bad as it gets. Or people who have, like this woman who adopted her son's murderer. I don't know if you ever saw this, but when her son's murderer, while he was in prison, she witnessed to him and he became a Christian. And after he was released, she adopted him. You talk about redemption. You talk about pain and redemption. I mean, it's mind blowing. There's no limits to it. That's why this is a pastoral, spiritual point as well. There are no limits on what God can redeem in a person's life, and in a person, it made a little thumbs up come up.
Yeah, why did not do it for me? I don't know. I don't get it.
I don't know. That is weird. Yeah. There's 2 things.
I got the magic thumbs.
2 things I want to say there, Trent. One is, for anybody that's heard me talk about the problem of evil, I really want to just jump off one of the things you said there, Trent, because people really like to make this distinction between like the logical evidential area and the existential emotional side of the problem of evil. And I actually find them to be one of the same coin. And the reason why is because I think if you answer the existential emotional problem of evil, it affects the logical evidential problem of evil necessarily because of the approach that we take to the problem of evil. The second thing I want to say is, like, if you have questions like this, and I'm actively researching this area still to popularize it. Like, look into the psychology of meaning making in relation to trauma. I think you would be just blown away by what you find there, and just how indomitable the human spirit is in the face of horrific things that happen to people. And they still like look at their life and cherish the most horrific things that happen to them. Like, if they were given the choice prior to the event to go through this, they would say no. But if you ask them, would you erase it? They would say no, because they've come to cherish this as part of their life.
And and again, the classic here is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. I mean, in a way, that book kicked off this whole genre, and it's easy to find. It's a cheap book. It's a quick read. It's both philosophical and literary. So if you want a gateway book into this literature that Than mentions, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. Unbelievably good book.
If you want, I got 2 videos. This first one on the problem of suffering, cites Trent's book a lot, and that's where I present the law of triumph, if anyone's interested.
Cool.
How do you deal with the multiverse as it relates to teleology? The one thing I tend to point out is that it doesn't get around it. Robin Collins has pointed this out, because then you have to figure out, why is the multiverse fine-tuned to make so much variety? Like, it doesn't really get around it at all.
Yeah, why isn't it a multiverse that just infinitely repeats the same pattern like a crystal?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like it's like people think you can just say multiverse and everything goes away.
By that logic, wouldn't God's ultimate glory be maximized by intentionally creating as much suffering as possible?
This is a common mistake. Sorry, I got excited, Trent, but if you wanted to say something, you can.
No, go ahead.
This is a common mistake I see all the time. The defeat condition is not a theodicy. The theodicy is going to predict what kind of world God is going to make. The defeat condition is just kind of setting the boundary conditions of the types of suffering that are compatible with God's existence. And so we're not saying that defeat is the ends, right? Like, it's not a means ends ethic we're putting up here. And defeat of suffering is not the end goal, right? Defeat is just the type of thing, like defeasible suffering is just the type of suffering that is going to be like falling within the boundary conditions of what is expected on theism. What kind of world God is going to make is going to be based upon a whole other network of other values. And this is where I would say something like God's, like, what we're going to predict God will do is it going to be based on meta-normative constraints, not meta-ethical constraints, meaning God's going to create worlds based off of the true, the good, and the beautiful. And included in that mix, I think, is going to be what kind of narrative reality will be the most meaningful to agents on the whole. That's my short answer. Trent, did you have anything there?
No, I mean, we're in one accord on that. And there's also one of the things people often forget here is that so think of Linda Zagzebski's work on, divine empathy.
Yeah, I love her work.
And omnisubjectivity. I've got an article on omnisubjectivity in, gosh, it's like the Blackwell Handbook of Love or something. They had asked Eleanor Stump to write it, and she was busy, so she passed the baton to me on that. And the thing is, it's an interesting property. Maybe God has it, maybe he doesn't. But humans have the ability to learn from the experiences of others. So you don't need a world in which every single person suffers maximally. A part of the value of a world is the diversity of different outcomes. But we need the opportunity to develop virtue, and we do need some people in the world to have those, those really heroically saintly lives. But I believe that in the afterlife, we will become so united to them in their suffering and in their experiences that we can actually develop virtue vicariously in certain kinds of ways through empathy. So there's a whole other research program here on empathy and learning, and not to mention the overall these aesthetic theodicies typically will endorse diversity of outcomes as a good for a world. So the world allows for these things, but it doesn't have to maximize them.
Money for coffee afterwards. God bless you all. Middle knowledge is an interesting argument to evil. Thank you, George. Trent, who makes better content, IP or Than?
Well, if you're talking about online content, that's one thing. If you're talking about, if you're talking about the warm fuzzies, you know, Dan's my man.
Excellent. All right. So we got through all the super chats, it looks like. So appreciate you coming. Again, for anyone interested, I will be at DebateCon 5 in Newark, New Jersey this Saturday, debating Lawrence Krauss on which is better for humanity, secular ethics or Christianity. And yeah, I again, every time I go back into sociology, I find more studies I can use because there's just so much data there. Anything you want to promote, Trent?
Well, I'm always happy to promote this book right here.
Mm-hmm.
It is, you know, but there's so many books that are even better. I've been reading Hud Hudson's Fallenness and Flourishing. Oh my God, what a good book by a great author and a great man. I just think the more that you read, the better it gets. But, you know, just I promote watching guys like Michael and Than and Cameron and other people who are out there. I know all these guys personally. They are truth seekers. They care about people. They're Christ followers. And I encourage everybody to really lean into the best stuff that's out there, like what these guys are producing.
Thank
So
you. Appreciate
I want to promote you.
Thank you. Much appreciated. So hopefully we'll have you back on the channel sometime soon.
Sure.
Thank you for coming on.
My pleasure.
Anything you want to say, Than? Yeah,
No,
I didn't think so.
I there is something I want to say, but I guess let me just have this last word on the problem of evil thing, okay? Because I see some things in the chat where people are like, you would never say this kind of stuff to somebody that like lost a child. Guess what? Actually, okay. I'm not going to dox myself by saying where this was. Trent, you already know about this. There was a school shooting that happened where my community was directly involved in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was one of the teachers at this community.
Mm.
And I was invited to speak on suffering after this event, like a week later, with these people. So I have. And this is not like a moral grandstand moment. That kind of stuff actually gets me a little mad because now you're sitting there in the comments being like, well, you would never say that, but I have. And the people that have received this message at the end felt empowered. They felt like they were giving the tools to find meaning in their suffering through the horrific events and find redemption in the horrific instances of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just really implore you to take off this vitriolic attitude towards suffering, the problem of evil, and all these other things, and really just look at it from the perspective that we're trying to present it.
Yeah. Well said. So, all right. Appreciate that. With that, I probably will try to do a debate review Monday at 8 Eastern on this channel after I debate Krauss. So stay tuned. I'll be back live again Monday, and hopefully you guys can come to the debate. It should be live stream Saturday if anyone wants to watch. So appreciate everyone coming, and we will close this out. I'll see you guys next time. You made it to the end of this video, which means this message matters to you. If you want to see more content like this reaching people for Christ, you can help make it happen. Your support makes these videos possible. Click the link below and donate today. And if you want to go even deeper, consider joining our Patreon community. You'll get early access to videos, behind-the-scenes content, and a place to connect with others passionate about this mission.